Liam had always been the kind of person who preferred quiet moments over busy streets. He lived in a small apartment near the edge of a coastal town, where the sea breeze carried the smell of salt and the cries of seagulls. During the week, he worked as a history teacher at the local school, teaching stories about kings, wars, and forgotten empires to students who were more interested in their phones. But on weekends, Liam had a different life. He would take his old backpack, fill it with snacks, a flashlight, and a small shovel, and set out on little adventures. His favorite places were old battlefields, abandoned villages, and ruins where stone walls still stood like silent guards over the past. It wasn't about treasure. He never expected to find gold or jewels. For Liam, it was about touching history, feeling the same wind that had brushed against people centuries ago. On one rainy Saturday afternoon, Liam found himself walking through an overgrown field. He had been here once before, but the thick grass and twisted branches had made it hard to explore. This time, he wore waterproof boots and carried a sturdy walking stick. The rain fell in steady drops, soaking his jacket, but he didn't mind. The gray clouds made everything seem quieter, almost like the world was holding its breath. At the far end of the field stood the remains of an old stone wall. Most of it had crumbled, and only a few blocks of rock were stacked together. Liam had read that this area might have been part of a small fort used during a border war hundreds of years ago. Most people ignored it. There were no grand towers or famous legends attached to the place. But for Liam, it was still worth a visit. He walked closer, stepping carefully on the muddy ground. Something caught his eye near the base of the wall. It wasn't shining, just a faint shape sticking out of the earth. At first, he thought it was a root or a piece of broken fence, but when he brushed away some wet grass, he saw the edge of metal, dark brown and covered in rust. Curiosity stirred in him. He knelt down and began to dig with his hands. The mud was cold, and the rain made the work messy, but he didn't stop. After a few minutes, he pulled something out. A sword, or at least what had once been a sword. Its blade was chipped and eaten away by time, its hilt wrapped in what remained of leather, now rotted and peeling. It looked completely useless as a weapon. Most people would have thrown it aside, but as Liam held it, he felt something strange. It wasn't heavy in the way old metal usually was. It felt balanced, almost natural in his grip. He turned it over, running his fingers along the blade. It was rough, and little flakes of rust fell away. For a moment, he considered leaving it there. After all, it was just a rusty piece of history, and he had no idea what he would even do with it. But something about the sword made him hesitate. Maybe it was the thought that someone long ago had held it in battle. Maybe it was the way it seemed to fit in his hand. Either way, he decided to take it home. He wrapped it in an old cloth from his backpack and carried it back through the rain. By the time he reached his apartment, the storm had grown stronger. Water dripped from his hair as he laid the sword on his small kitchen table. He made himself some tea, then sat down with a soft cloth and a brush, determined to clean away at least some of the dirt. As he worked, the room was silent except for the sound of rain against the window. He was halfway through scrubbing the hilt when he froze. It was faint, so faint that for a moment he thought it was just the wind, but he could have sworn he heard a voice, a whisper. He looked around. The television was off, the radio silent. The street outside was empty. The voice had been so soft that he wasn't even sure it had happened at all. Shaking his head, Liam went back to cleaning, but he couldn't ignore the strange feeling crawling up his spine. Later that night, after drying the sword and placing it on his desk, he sat in bed reading a book. His mind kept drifting back to that moment. He told himself it was nothing, just his imagination, maybe the sound of water in the pipes. But even as he tried to sleep, he kept seeing the image of the sword in his mind, lying there on the desk, as though it was waiting for something, Outside, the rain kept falling, tapping against the glass like quiet fingers, and in the darkness, though Liam didn't hear it this time, the sword whispered again. The next evening, Liam sat at his desk, staring at the sword. It lay on a piece of clean cloth, its surface still scarred with rust but a little cleaner than before. The rain from the day before had stopped, and a quiet stillness filled the air. Outside, the town's streetlights glowed softly in the darkness, their light spilling across the window. He told himself he was being ridiculous. Swords didn't whisper. Objects didn't talk. It had to be his imagination. But as he leaned back in his chair, something strange happened again. It started faint, almost like the rustle of leaves. Then, slowly, the sound became words. "The Emperor has returned." Liam's whole body went still. The voice was deep, calm, and carried a weight of authority. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning every corner. The door was shut, the window closed. No one else was there. The voice had come from the direction of the sword. His first thought was that he was tired. Maybe stress from work was making him hear things. But the way the words had echoed in his mind felt too real. It wasn't like remembering a sound, it was like hearing it in the moment. He sat there for a long while, staring at the sword as if it might speak again. But it remained silent, its dull surface reflecting the faint light from the desk lamp. The next day, Liam couldn't focus during his classes. His students noticed he was quieter than usual, and more than once he caught himself glancing at the clock, waiting for the day to end so he could get back home. That evening, he returned to his apartment and sat down with his laptop. If the sword really was speaking, and that was still a big if, then maybe it had some historical significance. He began searching through old online archives, museum catalogs, and rare history forums. Hours passed, but then something caught his attention. An old manuscript, stored in the digital records of the National History Archive, contained a drawing of a sword from the Carethian Empire, a kingdom that had fallen nearly 600 years ago. The sword in the drawing had a similar hilt and guard shape to the one sitting on his desk. According to the text, it had belonged to Emperor Aurelian, the last ruler of the empire. The legend said that during the final battle, the emperor had vanished, his body never found. Some claimed he had been killed in secret. Others believed he had escaped into hiding. The sword had disappeared on the same day, and over the centuries, it became a piece of myth, an artifact people spoke of but never saw. The part that made Liam pause was a single line in the manuscript's notes. It is said the Emperor's blade will speak only when the rightful bloodline rises again. Liam leaned back in his chair. Speak. The word felt heavy now. Was that what had happened? Had the sword recognized something? But that didn't make sense. He wasn't connected to the Carethian bloodline. He wasn't even from the same region. Over. The next few days, the voice returned, always at random moments. Sometimes it spoke a single sentence. Other times it was just a word, like soon or listen. One evening, as he sat reading in his living room, the voice came again, stronger this time. He walks again. You must find him. Liam almost dropped his book. Who? He whispered out loud before realizing how strange it was to talk to a sword. But the voice didn't answer. Curiosity began to mix with unease. He found himself holding the sword more often, turning it over in his hands as if that might unlock its secrets. Each time he touched it, there was a faint warmth in the metal, like it had been resting in sunlight. It wasn't enough to burn. It was just enough to make him aware of it. One night, he dreamed of a city he had never seen before. The streets were wide and paved with white stone, lined with banners bearing a golden crest. At the end of a long road stood a massive palace with silver rooftops. Crowds filled the square, cheering for a figure on a balcony. The figure wore a crown, but his face was hidden in shadow. When Liam woke, his heart was pounding. He couldn't shake the image from his mind. The next morning, he wrote down everything he remembered from the dream and began looking through maps and old records again. The golden crest from the banners matched a symbol from the Carithian Empire's history. The palace in his dream was almost identical to old sketches of the imperial palace, now in ruins. The pieces were starting to connect, though they made no logical sense. By now, Liam knew one thing for sure. The sword wasn't just an old piece of metal. It was something alive in its own way. It carried a voice, a purpose, and a history that refused to stay buried. What he didn't know, what still kept him awake at night, was why it had chosen him. In the days that followed, Liam's life began to change in ways he couldn't explain. It started with small things, moments that felt like coincidences, but happened too often to ignore. One morning, he decided to take the long way to work, walking through the park instead of his usual route. As he passed a quiet, tree-lined path, the sword, hidden inside a wrapped cloth in his backpack, seemed to grow heavier. It wasn't the uncomfortable weight of metal pressing down. It was more like it wanted him to stop. He did. The air felt different there, cooler, sharper, almost like the wind had turned to watch him. Without knowing why, he took a few steps toward a patch of stone half hidden in the grass. Kneeling, he brushed away the leaves and soil. Beneath was an old carving, 2 crossed swords over a crown, the same symbol from his dream. He stood there for a long time, heart beating faster. It was as if the sword had led him here to a place that still carried the memory of the Empire. That night the voice returned while he was making tea. Follow the signs. The words were clear this time, almost gentle. But they carried an urgency that made him set his cup down. He didn't answer out loud. Instead, he stared at the blade on his table. It had stopped whispering for now, but he felt certain it would speak again when it needed to. Over the next week, Liam's dreams became more vivid. He saw armies marching through snowy fields, their armor gleaming in the pale light. He heard the roar of crowds in vast halls and the quiet sound of a man's voice giving orders in a language he didn't understand. And always, somewhere in the dream, the sword was there. Sometimes in his own hand, sometimes in the hand of the crowned figure whose face he still couldn't see. The dreams left him both restless and curious. He began reading everything he could find about the Carithian Empire. The more he learned, the more strange details emerged. Rumors of a hidden bloodline, a prophecy about a blade that could choose a messenger, and an old map with roads that no longer existed. Then came the night when the voice spoke longer than ever before. Liam had been sitting on his balcony, the sword across his knees, listening to the quiet hum of the town below. The air smelled faintly of the sea. Without warning, the warmth returned to the metal and the voice filled his mind. There is one who carries the blood of kings. You must find him. Time grows thin. Liam's fingers tightened on the hilt. Why me? He asked quietly. The answer came without hesitation. Because you listen. The words sank deep into him, and for the first time, Liam felt the truth of them. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew the sword was right. He had listened when others might have walked away. From then on, it was as if an invisible thread connected him to the past. Whenever he walked through certain streets, his attention would be drawn to details others overlooked: a worn crest above an old shop, a weathered stone marker with faded letters, a building whose shape mirrored the towers in his dreams. The sword seemed to hum faintly when he was near something important, though no one else could hear it. One evening, while going through an antique bookstore, he found a thin, leather-bound journal tucked between 2 larger volumes. Inside were hand-drawn sketches of places that no longer existed, bridges, fountains, and roads from the old empire. On the last page, someone had written in neat, careful letters, "The Emperor sleeps until the blade calls him." Liam bought the book without hesitation. It felt like another piece of the puzzle, another sign that his strange journey was leading somewhere. But as the clues piled up, so did a sense of unease. He began noticing people watching him. At first, just quick glances from strangers passing. By then, more deliberate stares. Once, while walking home at night, he caught sight of a man in a dark coat standing across the street. When Liam turned to look again, the man was gone. The sword's voice grew more urgent after that. "Guard me. They are searching." It no longer felt like a quiet mystery. It felt like a path he was being pushed down, with each step leading him deeper into something far larger than himself. Yet, despite the growing danger, Liam couldn't bring himself to turn away. He was drawn forward by a feeling he couldn't explain, a mix of duty and wonder. One night, as he lay in bed with the sword resting against the wall beside him, he realized that the thought of giving it up had never crossed his mind. Not once. It had chosen him, and in some strange way he had chosen it too. It was a cold, clear night when Liam first saw him. Liam had just left the small grocery store near his apartment. The streets were quiet except for the soft hum of distant traffic. His backpack, carrying the wrapped sword, felt heavier than usual. He didn't think much of it until he turned down a narrow street and stopped. At the far end, under the glow of a flickering streetlight, a tall man stood perfectly still. He wore a long, dark coat that brushed against his boots. Even from this distance, Liam could see the way the man's posture was straight and alert, like a soldier standing guard. The stranger didn't move, but Liam had the uneasy feeling that the man was looking straight at him. Trying to ignore it, Liam continued walking, his pace quickening slightly. When he glanced back a moment later, the man was gone. That night, the sword spoke the moment Liam stepped into his apartment. He knows. They all know. Liam set the backpack on the table and slowly unwrapped the sword. "Who?" he asked quietly. "Seekers," the voice replied. "They want what is not theirs." Liam didn't sleep well. He kept thinking about the man's gaze, sharp and unblinking. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Over the next few days, he noticed more signs that he was being followed. A dark shape reflected in a shop window behind him. Footsteps that stopped when he stopped. Once, he even caught sight of two people speaking in hushed voices near the park bench where he often rested. When he approached, they walked away without a word. The sword's whispers became more frequent. "Do not let them take me." One evening, Liam decided to go to the city's central library. He had discovered that it kept rare documents in a special historical archive, records that might hold more clues about the Emperor's disappearance. The journey took him across the busy center of town, through crowded streets lit by warm shop windows. But even there, among hundreds of people, Liam felt the same cold prickling on the back of his neck. Someone was watching. In the library's quiet reading room, he asked the archivist for materials on the final years of the Carethian Empire. She returned with a small stack of fragile papers and a sealed wooden case. Inside the case was a yellowed scroll. As Liam unrolled it, his eyes widened. It was a map, hand-drawn with roads and landmarks long erased from modern maps. One route, marked in red ink, ended at a building labeled Imperial Seat. The sword grew warm in his bag, almost as if it recognized the map. Liam was tracing the red route with his finger when a shadow fell across the table. He looked up. The tall man in the dark coat was standing there. "You've been looking for answers," the man said in a voice low enough that only Liam could hear. "The blade speaks to you, doesn't it?" Liam's heart thudded in his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. It chose you. That means you've already heard the call. Before Liam could respond, the man leaned closer. Be careful who you trust. Not all who seek the Emperor wish for his return. With that, the stranger turned and walked away, disappearing between the tall shelves of books. Liam sat there for a long moment, staring after him. He had more questions than answers. Who was this man? If he knew about the sword, did that mean he knew where the Emperor was? And what did he mean by not all wish for his return? That night, Liam boarded a late train to the capital city. He had made his decision quickly. If the Imperial Palace still held any secrets, he needed to see it for himself. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The fewer people who knew, the better. The journey took hours. Outside the train window, the lights of small towns passed by in the darkness. The sword lay across his lap, wrapped in layers of cloth. Every so often, he felt a faint vibration through the fabric, like it was alive. As the train neared the capital, the voice spoke again, stronger than before. The road is almost at its end. Keep walking and you will find him. Liam tightened his grip on the sword. He didn't know what awaited him at the palace, only that whatever it was, it would change everything. Liam arrived in the capital city just as the early morning sun began to rise. The air was crisp and carried a faint scent of smoke and old stone. From the train station, he took a slow walk toward the ruins of the Imperial Palace. The city around him was busy and loud, but as he neared the palace, everything seemed to quiet down. It was like stepping back in time. The palace was larger than he had imagined. Even in ruins, its walls stood tall and proud, covered in vines and moss. Broken statues and collapsed columns lay scattered across the overgrown courtyard. The sky was clear, and sunlight poured down on the cracked stones, making the shadows sharp and deep. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he took the sword from his backpack. He wrapped the cloth away, and the metal gleamed faintly in the morning light. The rust was mostly gone now, as if the sword had been cleaned by some unseen force. It felt alive in his hands, heavy and warm, as if waiting. He walked slowly through the palace gates, stepping carefully over fallen debris. Memories from his dreams rushed back. The wide stone steps, the grand halls, the banners long faded but still hanging on some walls. Every step made his heart beat faster. He was not just walking through ruins, he was walking through history itself. In the main throne room, the space was vast and empty, except for one figure sitting quietly in the far corner. Liam's breath caught. The man looked old, with silver hair and eyes that shone with deep wisdom. He wore simple clothes, but his posture was regal, as if he still carried the weight of a crown even without one. The sword's whisper came softly again. He is the Emperor. The old man looked up and smiled when he saw Liam. You brought it, he said simply. Liam nodded, holding out the sword carefully. I don't understand. How are you here? How have you lived all this time? The Emperor's eyes held sadness and strength. I have waited, hidden from those who wished me gone. The sword kept me safe, but it needed a messenger, someone who could hear its call. Liam lowered the sword slowly, feeling the truth settle in his chest. He realized the sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a bridge between past and present, a protector of hope and a sign that something new was beginning. The Emperor rose slowly, leaning on a carved wooden staff. You have listened when many would not. That is why the sword chose you. You are part of this story now, not just a teacher of history, but a bearer of it. Liam felt a deep sense of purpose growing inside him. For years, he had only told stories about kings and battles. Now, he was living one. Outside, the wind carried a quiet song through the broken palace walls, as if the very stones were welcoming the return of their lost ruler. Liam knew the road ahead would be difficult. There were others who did not want the Emperor to return. But in this moment, standing in the sunlight with the sword in his hand and the Emperor before him, he understood that history had chosen a new path. The Empire was no longer just a memory. It was alive once more.